So you're sitting in your car late at night. It's 1946. The war has just ended. People are trying to get back to normal, and you're parked with someone you care about on a quiet country road outside Texarkana. There's nobody around, no street lights, no traffic, just darkness. And then someone steps out of the shadows. You can't see his face because he's wearing a mask and he's holding a gun.
For 10 weeks in the spring of 1946, something terrifying happened around the Arkansas-Texas border. Young couples were attacked, people were murdered, a town went into a state of panic, and despite one of the largest manhunts in the region's history, the killer was never officially identified.
Tonight on Arkansas Unsolved, we're going to Texarkana, to the case of the Phantom Killer, the murders that became known as the Moonlight murders. And one question that has remained unanswered for nearly 80 years is, who was the Phantom?
I'm Heather.
And I'm Jeremy.
And this is
Arkansas Unsolved. Wow. So it's awesome, Heather. This is something that I wasn't necessarily aware of. And so today, as we mentioned, we are going to dig into the Phantom Killer. Now, interestingly enough, there's lots of lore behind this, but this is the first time we're actually digging in to an actual criminal case or a crime story.
Yeah.
Much of what we've done prior to this is really dealing with unsolved elements that might be a little bit more historical or supernatural or paranormal even. But today we're talking about the Phantom Killer. And so before we get into the numbers, we need to understand Texarkana, because this isn't just any town. Texarkana sits directly on the Arkansas-Texas border. There is a Texarkana, Arkansas, and a Texarkana, Texas.
Mind blown.
Two municipalities, two states, but essentially one community. Now, that's wild.
That is wild.
Very unique.
Yeah. And in 1946, Texarkana was a growing community coming out of World War II, right? The war had brought jobs, economic activity to the region. People were going to work, young people were going out, people were living again, right? Families were living their lives, and then suddenly people began disappearing into the night.
Interesting.
Not disappearing forever, but disappearing into places where nobody could see them. Back roads, secluded roads, what people at the time called lovers' lanes.
Oh, yeah. Now, what town would not have, or what good town, it wouldn't be complete without a lover's lane. And that detail becomes important because the Phantom seemed to understand something about these locations. Young couples would go somewhere private and they would be alone. No witnesses, no crowds, no protection until one night they weren't alone anymore.
Wow. Okay, so February 22nd, 1946. We're in the 40s here, right? The first known attack that occurred on the night of February 22nd, 1946. This was Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larry. They were sitting in their car on a secluded road in Bowie County, Texas. Everything was normal until a man approached them.
The attacker was armed, and he ordered the couple out of the vehicle. But what made this encounter especially terrifying was his appearance. He had covered his face with a cloth or burlap-like material, and there were openings cut in it for his eyes. That's creepy. That's leery.
Right? Think about that for a second. You're sitting in a dark car.
Yeah.
Stranger approaches. You can't see his face. You don't know who he is, and he doesn't want you to see it.
Yeah, and it's just reading that or knowing that happened is scary all on its own. And here's where things begin to take even more of a turn. Hollis was attacked with a gun and suffered severe injuries to his skull.
Wow.
And Mary Jean was also attacked, but then something interrupted the assault. Headlights appeared. Another vehicle was approaching.
Wow. So the attacker fled, right? Jimmy Hollis and Mary Jean Larry survived. And because they survived, They were able to give investigators something incredibly important. This is the scary part, but it's like the real, like, actual eyewitness.
Exactly.
A description, a masked man, a figure in the darkness, a man who appeared to be targeting young couples.
Wow. Heather, it's important to note that at the time, investigators had no idea that this was just the beginning.
Wow. This is scary. And this is true story. This is
real
happenings.
You know, it's one thing to think about unsolved things that might be a little bit more mysterious or claimed to be supernatural, but it takes a different, it has a different effect when you know you're dealing with real people that were really entwined or intertwined in this, what is a very, to this day, still unsolved, but it's also a scary case. So it's crazy. So let's get to the first murders. Okay. Exactly 1 month later, on March 24th, another couple was found. Richard Griffin was 29 years old. Polly Ann Moore was only 17.
Wow.
They were discovered in Griffin's car on a secluded road, and listen to this, both had been shot in the back of the head. Wow.
Goodness. And investigators noticed something disturbing. Evidence suggested the victims had been killed outside the vehicle and then placed back inside.
Like, what is the point of that? Why? Who would go through the trouble of doing that? And maybe we'll find out as we dig deeper into this story. And so now police had something much more serious on their hands. You know, the first attack, they survived, but now they have an actual double murder on their hands. And so the first attack could have been an isolated assault, but two people were now dead, and the circumstances were very similar. Young people, a secluded road, a nighttime attack, and a killer who appeared to want his victims helpless.
And then came another attack, one that would make the fear even worse, right?
God, how could it get worse? You know what I mean? Gosh, it's crazy.
On the night of April 13th into April 14th, 1946, 16-year-old Paul Martin and 15-year-old Betty Jo Booker were together.
Unbelievable.
Betty Jo was a talented young musician. She'd been playing saxophone with a local band. Paul was her friend. They had no idea they were about to become the next victim. 15
and 16 years old. And it's tragic because their bodies were later discovered at Spring Lake Park on the Texas side. Their car was found nearby, but the victims weren't simply sitting inside the vehicle. Their bodies were found some distance away.
And once again, investigators connected the crime to the earlier murders. A .32 caliber weapon was associated with the killings, so that was one part of evidence linking the happenings.
Right.
And police were beginning to see a pattern.
Now, at this point, we have 4 people dead, and the community was terrified, but the phantom wasn't finished. Now think about that. You know, it's a small town, Arkansas, which I know Texarkana could be considered one of the larger little towns, but imagine during this time, you can imagine people were beginning to get very anxious and uneasy about what was going on.
Definitely, with the fact that the police really had not much to go on
at all.
And this phantom killer could have really literally been anybody.
Well, and you know what happens when word starts to get out. Listen to what happened next. Newspapers began giving the attacks names, and one name eventually stuck: the Moonlight murders.
Gosh, so it begins with the mass hysteria
and the media.
Yes. And another name began appearing in the headlines: the Phantom Killer. The name came from the idea that this mysterious attacker could appear from nowhere, strike, and disappear.
And here's something very interesting. Despite the name Moonlight Murders, the crimes weren't actually tied to a full moon. The nickname was created by the press because of the nighttime nature of the attacks. And so hence, you got the media trying to get people to read, and they come up with a name. And so, gosh, it's just crazy. Sometimes I wonder, do we really help or do we hurt in terms of that type of thing? Yeah. Media and so on.
True, very true. Newspapers weren't the only thing making the situation worse. The entire town was becoming consumed by fear.
Wow.
So think about it at that time. You're living in Texarkana in the spring, 1946. You're sitting at home. It's getting dark. And you know there's a killer somewhere outside.
Gosh.
Could be anywhere. You don't know his name. You don't know where he lives. You don't know what he looks like. And you don't know when he'll strike again.
And that's when people began changing their behavior. Residents stayed inside. Doors were locked. Windows were watched. People bought weapons. Police increased patrol. And secluded roads that had once been places for young couples to spend time together became places people were afraid to go to. Now, I hate that. It sucks. And that's what happens, you know. It's like innocence is lost and things begin to be taken away from us. And it's a shame that happened really in Texarkana.
Right. It makes me think of the fear, thinking back to COVID. It's how everything happened in the fear. And
oh my gosh, dude.
In our
mass
homes.
Hysteria. Yeah.
We weren't talking to, our neighbors, family.
It's insane. I mean,
it really is.
People didn't even attend funerals of their loved ones because of
fear.
And it's just insane what fear will do.
Yeah. So the fear was so intense that people weren't simply afraid of the phantom. They were afraid of everyone.
Gosh.
Any stranger, any suspicious vehicle, any unusual sound outside, any person walking down the road at night. Like everybody's a suspect.
Yeah, and what happens is when the fear takes over a community, just like you said, everyone starts looking not only like a suspect, but they start looking for a suspect.
Yes.
And here's where the manhunt begins to build. Law enforcement agencies from both Arkansas and Texas became involved. The investigation grew. Texas Rangers were brought in. And one of the most recognizable lawmen associated with the case was Texas Ranger Captain Manuel Lone Wolf Gonzalez.
Yeah, Gonzalez had a reputation. He was an experienced lawman with training in criminalistics and ballistics. And when he arrived in Texarkana, people hoped he might be the man who finally caught the phantom.
Well, and you put your hope in the experience. You've got outsiders coming in. They're dealing with this type of murder or types of mindsets that would produce someone who could commit these types of crimes. And here's what's sad. Instead of immediately finding the killer, investigators found something else. It was pure chaos. Reports poured in. People claimed to have seen suspicious men. People accused neighbors. People reported strange activity. And listen to this, Heather. Some people even claimed to be the phantom themselves. Wow.
Well, yeah, because you've got this mass hysteria over this figure. So this person is famous. So you have the I want to be famous. I want to make a name for myself. I'm going to say I'm the phantom.
It's insane. It's crazy.
Why? So, and then there were the false confessions, false leads, rumors, accusations. The investigation was becoming almost as chaotic as the fear itself.
Wow. So can you imagine how hard it is to be a lawman that day, trying to do your job, and it be pure chaos? And not only that, you're dealing with a time, keep in mind this is the 40s, you didn't have the technology that is at our disposal today. And so I'm sure that made investigations even more difficult.
Oh, yeah, 100%. Wow. All right, so here we go again. Then on May 3rd, 1946, something happened that changed the nature of this case. The target wasn't a young couple parked on a secluded road. It was a farmhouse.
Wow.
Goodness. Virgil Starks was inside his home in Miller County, Arkansas, and then he was shot twice through a window.
Goodness.
Sitting in his home.
Unbelievable. Now, there are reports that his wife, Katie Starks, was also inside, and when she heard the shots, she ran toward the telephone. And then the attacker fired again. Katie was shot twice in the face, but listen, Katie survived.
Wow. She survived. That's terrifying. I mean, That's absolutely terrifying. The earlier attacks had created a frightening pattern. Young couples were being attacked in isolated areas, but now the killer had apparently come into someone's neighborhood, into their home.
Which makes it, in my opinion, even more scarier, because now your
Right.
home was your safe place. You felt safe, but now you don't even have your home to feel safe in. And listen, investigators found evidence at the scene that contributed to the belief that this was connected to the earlier attacks. And once again, Texarkana was left asking the same question: where was the phantom?
Wow. So by now, people were terrified, and the fear produced some almost unbelievable scenes, right? Residents reported strange lights. People saw suspicious vehicles. Police responded to calls constantly. Can you imagine?
I'm sure.
Absolute
Chaos.
Yes. Everyone was looking for the phantom.
And Heather, at one point, reports of strange lights around the Starks farmhouse led officers to investigate. But what they discovered wasn't a supernatural event, or the phantom for that matter. It was Texas Ranger Gonzalez and a Life magazine reporter photographing the crime scene with flash bulbs. Now, how ironic.
Definitely. Which tells you just how chaotic this investigation had become. There were law enforcement officers, reporters, curious residents, rumors, and a killer that nobody could identify.
And then, Heather, complete silence, nothing. After the May 3rd attack, the phantom disappeared. No confirmed murders attributed to him, no dramatic arrest, no final confrontation, no confession. The phantom simply stopped.
And that may be the most disturbing part of this entire story, because we don't know why. Did he leave town? Did he die?
So many unsolved.
Was he arrested for another crime? Or did he simply decide he was finished? Or did he continue somewhere else?
Well, and that's what makes this whole thing unsolved, is that we simply don't know.
We don't know.
And that's what transformed this case from a murder investigation into the legend that it technically has become to this day, 80 plus years later. It's unbelievable.
It's wild. But investigators did have a major suspect. His name was Youell Swinney. Swinney had a criminal record that included crimes like car theft, counterfeiting, burglary, and assault.
Yeah, and investigators noticed something interesting. Before several of the murders, reports had been made about stolen cars. Cars would disappear and later be abandoned, and that pattern drew attention.
It did. Then, in July 1946, investigators followed a reported stolen vehicle. The investigation led them to a woman who identified herself as Swinney's girlfriend. And according to historical accounts, she provided investigators with details about the murders that had not been publicly released.
Wow. Now that's huge. I mean, because if someone knows details that only the killer or investigators should know, that's,
Right.
I mean, ultimately that's going to get your attention,
Right.
and you're going to listen to what this person has to say.
That's right. Yeah. But there was a problem. Her
Of course.
story changed. And eventually she married Swinney.
Wow.
Because of problems with her testimony, investigators didn't believe that they had a reliable case they could take to trial for the murders.
Well, and now here's the thing. Swinney was eventually imprisoned for life as a repeat offender for car theft, but he was never convicted of the Moonlight murders. Now, one thing, it's crazy that you can be convicted for life, for stealing cars, but
Right.
another thing is, if Swinney was in fact the phantom,
Right.
there's a little bit of relief we could take in knowing that at least he spent his entire life behind bars.
Yeah. It's a little bit of...
If is the
If,
question.
yeah.
Right.
And that's an important distinction. You can't suspect someone, or you can suspect someone. You can believe someone committed a crime, but unless the evidence proves it, the case remains unsolved. And officially, the phantom killer was never, ever identified.
Right. And so now, Heather, let's begin to talk about some of the theories. Was Youell Swinney the phantom killer?
Well, there are reasons people believe he was. He had a criminal history. He was associated with the stolen vehicles. His girlfriend provided investigators with information about the crimes. And investigators clearly considered him a serious suspect.
Well, but there are also reasons we have to be careful. He was never convicted. The evidence wasn't strong enough to establish his guilt in court, and the case contains decades of speculation, conflicting stories, and misinformation. So, Heather, how do you really know?
Oh, man, you don't.
That's it.
Wait. Okay, so it brings us to one of the biggest rules of true crime. A compelling theory isn't the same thing as proof.
Well, exactly. And that's why we call this Arkansas Unsolved, not Arkansas Solved, right? Obviously, if this was solved, we wouldn't have anything to talk about, but it's unsolved for a reason.
Yeah. And Swinney wasn't the only person suspected. People accused all kinds of individuals. Some accusations were based on little more than rumors. There were false confessions. There were people who inserted themselves into the investigation.
Wow.
Crazies.
Of course.
And one young man connected to a prominent Texarkana family even died by suicide in Fayetteville after leaving behind what appeared to be a confession. But investigators determined that it wasn't credible.
Well, and this is another fascinating aspect of the case, because the Phantom wasn't just terrorizing people physically. He had created an atmosphere where everyone was looking over their shoulder. And so in that environment, it produces false suspects, false confessions, and most of all, a lot of paranoia.
Right. Can see that. The killer may have disappeared, but the fear he created didn't disappear with him.
Well, and here's something that makes this case especially fascinating today. The FBI has an extensive archive relating to the Texarkana Phantom Moonlight murders. Thousands of pages of historical investigative material are available through the FBI's records.
Interesting.
I'd love to look at those, actually.
Yeah. So that means that almost 80 years later, investigators, historians, and true crime researchers can still look through the surviving records and ask, what did investigators know? What did they miss? Which leads were legitimate? And was the wrong man suspected?
Well, and obviously, the existence of those files doesn't mean we've suddenly solved the case, but it does remind us that this wasn't just a campfire story.
No.
Real people died.
Right.
Real families were devastated, and law enforcement genuinely tried to find the person responsible.
So let's talk about this. There was a movie.
There was.
Actually, there's two.
Right.
But one that we've watched. So 30 years after the murders, the Phantom came back to the big screen. Arkansas filmmaker Charles B. Pierce created the 1976 film, The Town That Dreaded Sundown.
And Heather, the film was inspired by the Moonlight murders, and it helped transform the Phantom Killer from a regional mystery into a piece of American horror folklore.
But there's an important warning here.
Of course.
The movie isn't a documentary. It took significant liberties with the real events. It
did, and we watched it last night, and so we know that the movie even ends with a version of the Phantom escaping, which was wild, and it's dramatically effective for big screen, but that's not how the real case ended. And here's the reality. There was no final chase.
No.
There was no cinematic showdown, and there was never confirmed identity of who the Phantom actually was.
Right. Real life was much more frustrating. The Phantom simply vanished.
And Heather, what do you think? Well, what makes this case so disturbing?
So for me, it's the mask.
The mask?
Yeah. Because, imagine what those victims saw.
Wow.
Not a recognizable face.
That's freaky.
Not somebody they knew. A human figure with a blank makeshift mask. You couldn't read his expression. You couldn't see his eyes clearly.
Goodness.
You couldn't know who he was, and then he disappears.
Well, and that's a very valid and solid point. And I would say for me, it's just the randomness of this whole thing. So at first, it seemed like the Phantom had a particular type of victim, young couples, secluded roads, nighttime. But then you have the Starks farmhouse, and suddenly the pattern just isn't so simple. And so as we mentioned earlier, it's like you at one point would even feel safe in your home, but even that was taken away.
It was, exactly. And that's what would make the fear so much worse. If you're a teenager sitting in your car, you think you understand the danger, right? But then someone is attacked inside their own home, like you said. So now nobody knows where is the danger, right? We're always trying to get ourselves out of danger. Well, but in this case, there's no pattern, there's no rhyme, there's no reason.
That's right.
It's anywhere, everywhere, anyone at any given moment. Which
leads us to ask this question one more time, Heather. Right. Who was the Phantom Killer?
So the most commonly cited suspect that we talked about, Youell Swinney, but officially we don't know.
And could Swinney have been responsible for all of the attacks? Possibly. Could someone else have been responsible? Of course, that is also possible.
Mm-hmm. Could some of the attacks have been committed by different people? That's another question.
Very true.
Because when you're dealing with a case from 1946, right, evidence can be incomplete, records can be lost, witness memories change, and investigative techniques were nowhere near what they are today.
That's right. And there is another uncomfortable possibility. What if the Phantom simply stopped? What if he never killed again? What if the person responsible lived an ordinary life afterward? Like he went to work, he had dinner, he raised a family, walking around Texarkana while knowing exactly what he had done. Wow.
I can't. That's the kind of question that makes an unsolved case stay with you.
It really is. It really is.
Right? So before we finish tonight's episode, we want to remember something. It's easy when talking about an unsolved murder case to focus on the killer, the mystery, the theories, the suspect, the mask, all the mysterious things. But there were real victims.
Well, and that's right. And that's what makes this case so different for us. 5 people lost their lives in the attacks attributed to the Phantom. Richard Griffin, Polly Ann Moore, Paul Martin, Betty Jo Booker, and Virgil Starks. We remember them.
Yes. 3 others survived attacks: Jimmy Hollis, Mary Jean Larry, and Katie Starks.
And while the Phantom became a legend, these people were someone's children, someone's friends, someone's family. And that's the part of the story that shouldn't get lost in all of this.
That's right.
So here's what we know. A mass attacker terrorized Texarkana in 1946. 5 people were killed, 3 people survived the attack. The crimes created panic across the community. Law enforcement launched a massive investigation. Youell Swinney became the primary suspect, but he was never convicted of the murders. And the Phantom, to this day, has never officially been identified.
And then the attacks just stopped.
No final murder, no confession, no body, no definitive evidence, just silence.
So, which leaves us with the question, what happened to the Phantom?
Nearly 80 years later, the Phantom Killer remains one of the most infamous unsolved mysteries connected to Arkansas. And Heather, before we started researching this, I wasn't familiar with the Phantom Killer, but it's crazy that took place right here in our state of Arkansas. It's wild.
That's right. So, of course, after all this time, the streets have changed, the technology has changed, Texarkana has changed, but the mystery remains. It's still there.
It does, and it is. And so, maybe the Phantom was Youell Swinney. Maybe he wasn't. Maybe the answer is buried somewhere in an old case file. Maybe it's in a story that was never believed, or maybe the truth disappeared with the man who knew it.
Gosh. And that's what makes the Moonlight murder so haunting. The killer didn't leave behind a name. He left behind a question.
Who was the man behind the mask?
And where did he go?
I'm Jeremy.
I'm Heather.
And this has been Arkansas Unsolved. Until next time, lock your doors.
Watch the shadows.
And remember, some mysteries are still waiting to be solved.
That's right.
We'll see you next time on Arkansas Unsolved, brought to you by the Junto Podcast. That's right, the Together Podcast. Until next time, be blessed.